Hi, everyone. Welcome to our town hall today. I am Arati Kreibich, and I am so happy to have you all join us. As you all know, I'm running for Congress in New Jersey's District 5. We've been holding these town halls on a weekly basis now for about 5 weeks. This is our fifth one since the pandemic crisis started. And we've been talking a lot about the various different ways that COVID-19 pandemic has been intersecting with all the different issues that we've already had in our society, and talking about how this has been exacerbating the kinds of things that already existed and what our way forward is, how to help the most amount of people that we possibly can, how to make sure that we're centering around poor and working families and middle-class families, how we're centering around vulnerable communities, how we're making sure that we talk about the climate crisis, and that we talk about folks who really need the most help. So I'm happy today to be on. I'm deeply appreciative of all of the experts who've joined us over the last 4 weeks. We've delved into subjects like the medical status of COVID-19, treatments and vaccines, and the ever-changing landscape, and what it means to flatten the curve. And now we're coming up to a point where we're thinking about reopening, when we're thinking about what we need to do to get back. We've started there. We've talked about the climate crisis. We've talked about mental health care. We've spoken about education and racial justice. And that, particularly this week, has been hitting home for a lot of us. It's been a week heavier than other ones in terms of the kinds of things that we are seeing that are being amplified, the systemic racism that exists, and the unfortunate deaths that are occurring because of it. Being Black in America does seem like it is a death sentence, and this is never something that should be the case, not for any single person. So we've spoken about how particularly the pandemic crisis has intersected with racial justice. We've spoken about immigration and working families and the kinds of reliefs that we need. And I'd love to continue that conversation today with all of you. Would love to talk about all the different ways that either the pandemic has affected you, is affecting you now, but also just in general and what we're thinking about in terms of moving forward. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. Really happy to have you on board. And I see that we have a bunch of folks on. And we'll see if we have any questions. Okay. As we start this, yeah. I think we have a question in chat. The Q&A in the Zoom webinar. And the first question is from anonymous attendee. Welcome. And it says, do you support the Kana and Ryan bill that gives $2,000 a month to Americans? Thank you for that question. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate you asking that. I think that COVID relief, as we've spoken about in the past, absolutely needs to center around working people, needs to center around folks who really need the support. And I absolutely support $2,000 a month. I think that we need to have that on a rolling basis. We had the $1,200 cash relief from the stimulus package. I think that was a good start, but it expires. Rent is still due. And I think we should cancel rent. But in the meantime, we still have a lot of expenses. Folks are still trying to figure out what they're doing and how they're living on a day-to-day basis. And particularly for people who are essential workers, particularly for people who may not necessarily have all the safety nets that others do. I think it's important that we have just $2,000 a month on a rolling basis until the crisis ends. And I absolutely support this. And I think this is something that we need to fight for. General. Great. I think we have a few more questions. So trying to get them coming. So please type your questions in, share them wherever you are, share them in the Q&A, share them on whatever platform you're on, Facebook Live, etc. We'll collate them, and I will make sure that I will answer them on here with our staff and volunteers. I think we have another question. Philip in Glen Rock, are you on? All right. So the question from Philip is, can we at least get Medicare buy-in at a reasonable price if we do not get Medicare for all? So thank you for that question, Philip. I appreciate it. I think that we absolutely need to be fighting for Medicare for all, for a single payer healthcare system. This is particularly important now that we're in the middle of a pandemic crisis, because we already know from before the pandemic crisis that so many Americans have so many catastrophic medical bills, and that folks go bankrupt because of medical bills. The fact that we don't have adequate access to adequate medical care and healthcare in America for everybody is abominable. For us as a first world country, as the richest country in the world, this is not what should be happening. So absolutely, we need to try and advocate and implement single payer healthcare. We need to have Medicare for all that happens, especially as we go through this pandemic crisis, right? Because it's not just about folks right now who are recovering from COVID-19. It's not just about folks who are recovering and moving on. It's also about the fact that what we don't see are long-term consequences for those who are recovering from COVID-19. Long-term health consequences like lung scarring, like cardiovascular disease might be exacerbated, like the fact that some folks have permanent kidney failure, long-term mobility issues. All of those issues are going to need long-term care, or a lot of them are going to need a lot more long-term care that we know. And this is going to put a strain on our already strained medical system and on our already strained medical costs that we have. And the only way forward for us is Medicare for all. Look, absolutely, a buy-in, a public option is something that is helpful. That is something that is far better than what Trump is trying to do, which is repeal everything. But it's the very least. It's the very least of what we should be fighting for. It should be, if anything, a very small stepping stone. I think that what we need to do is make sure that we keep fighting for Medicare for all. We keep fighting for that single payer system, because what we see now, and what we are seeing because of the pandemic, is that as more people understand the real importance of having healthcare, having access to healthcare, having a single payer system has gotten to the top of everyone's priority list. Because we understand that healthcare should not be tied to our jobs, period. And I think that because of this pandemic crisis showing us the world in which we should be going, this public health crisis has really crystallized how important the fight for Medicare for all is. And I think we should go all in for that. All right. I think we have, next question is Jackie in Franklin. She asks, what would you like to see the federal government do to get everyone following CDC guidelines on COVID-19? Thank you for that question, Jackie. Are you on? All right, well, I guess she's not on Zoom, but she is asking the question through one of our other ways. She's on Facebook. Well, thank you for asking this question on Facebook. I appreciate it, Jackie. So the question is, what would you like to see the federal government do to get everyone following CDC guidelines of COVID-19? Look, CDC, we still don't have a cure. We don't have an effective treatment yet for COVID-19. I think everyone knows that. In fact, the treatment, hydroxychloroquine, which was something that was talked about in the beginning, that Trump talked about, how he's taking prophylactically. In fact, there is a report that's coming out that's reviewing whether or not it's exacerbating deaths in COVID-19 patients in a particular subset. And in fact, the WHO halted that treatment arm in their trial that they have right now because they're reviewing the data. We don't know for sure that it's making things worse, but we do know that it's not this magical cure-all that we thought it was. So in the absence of a cure, in the absence of a treatment, in the absence of a vaccine, which is still at least a year away, what we need to do is make sure that we follow the behavioral, the CDC guidelines for behavior rules, because those have been working really well so far, right? And so those are all the CDC guidelines that you're talking about, Jackie, which is making sure that we are physically distant from other folks, making sure that we're at least 6 feet apart when we're outside, washing our hands thoroughly and often, and wearing masks. Those are the key things that we need to do. What we need to do is make sure that everybody is on the same page. I would love for the federal government, I would love for everybody at all levels of government to be able to amplify this message. And what's really important in terms of if we're going to start reopening our economy, if we're going to start figuring out how to get back to work, how to start opening up from our stay-at-home orders that we have as we're going over that peak of the curve, and to make sure that we don't have a second wave that is as brutal and that is as overwhelming as the one we've had so far. What the key to that is going to be testing. It's going to be testing both for the PCR test that determines whether or not you have the virus, but it's also going to be testing for the antibody test. Now, we know that the antibody test is not perfect. We know that it doesn't necessarily mean that you're immune, but it does have a decent indicator for whether or not you've had COVID-19, whether folks are asymptomatic. And what we need is an established program of making sure that we are, that we have both the PCR and the antibody test, and that we follow people over time, especially if they test negative in the beginning. We also need a robust contact tracing program, and we need isolation. And all of that needs a lot of resources. So one of the best ways to get to following the guidelines from COVID-19 is to make sure the federal government is putting as many resources, adequate resources, towards testing across the board. We can't just leave it for the states. We can't just have the federal government abdicate responsibility and say, here, the states, you all do this. We need something that's robust, something that is uniform, because at the end of the day, when you look at the supply chain for testing, when you look at all the things that are necessary, all of it is coordinated across states and globally, really. And so what we need is the federal government to step up, be able to allocate those resources. What we also need is the federal government who believes in data and follows policies based on data. That means actually getting that data in the first place. And I think that's critically important. And along with that are policies like paid sick leave, like expanding healthcare coverage, because along with testing and contact tracing, what we're going to need is isolation, right? For folks who are testing positive for the PCR test, they need to be isolated to make sure that they're not spreading to other folks. And how are you going to do that if you are, say, an essential worker that needs to go to work? Or you are the only person who you're the sole breadwinner for the family. You need to have paid sick leave. across the board. You need to make sure that we need to make sure from the federal government point of view that we're supporting people, that we need, again, going back to the $2,000 cash payment on a monthly basis. I think all of that is going to be necessary for as long as this pandemic crisis is in this crisis mode. I think those are the things that we can do that will best support the CDC guidelines on COVID-19. And really, at a very basic level, we need our elected leaders to follow the rules, to wear the masks, right? To wash their hands, to model this behavior that we expect everybody to be doing. And that is the very least of what we need. Right. We have some more questions that are coming in from all different places. Let's see what else we have. All right. So next question is from Nikhil. And Nikhil is asking, oh, are you on, Nikhil?
Yeah, I'm on.
Oh, that's great. Well, thanks for being on. Would love to hear a question.
Awesome. Well, first off, thanks for taking the time to do this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And so my question is, I've been looking into it more and more, and what I've kind of come to the realization is that when we talk about things like single-payer healthcare or the Green New Deal, or reforming the criminal justice system, especially with the events of this past week, it becomes more evident that the solution is to get money out of politics. But obviously, the Citizens United decision from 2010 makes that really difficult to do. So my question is, how would you legislate to get money out of politics without calling for a constitutional amendment? Because obviously that's extremely difficult to do, or contradicting the decision from Citizens United.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you for that question, Nikhil. I really appreciate it. As you know, I think as one of the cornerstones on which I'm running is getting corporate PAC money and getting the undue influence of corporate money out of politics and out of government, right? I agree with you 100%. I think that one of the worst things that has happened to politics has been the Citizens United decision. I think that the influence of corporate money has stymied policies from decades. Prime example of that is climate crisis and the kinds of policies that we were working towards, or that legislatures were working towards even in the 80s to be able to mitigate climate change. And they were well on their way until there was fossil fuel money that came in terms of ExxonMobil and other fossil fuel companies that really essentially put a stop to those policies, right? They essentially lobbied, they gave money to politicians in terms of donations, and we saw those policies really being watered down or disappearing completely. And I think that's exactly what happens, is that we have, they actually stymied the policies that are going to be helping us, helping the people, and clearly helping the planet, which is now we have an existential crisis where we need to act immediately and acutely. So how would I reduce the corporate influence in politics without amending the Constitution? I think that we absolutely actually need to amend the Constitution. And in fact, I've signed the pledge on the move to amend. Clearly, that's going to take a while to get there. In the meantime, I think that there are a number of things that we can do, from making sure as people that we elect folks like me who are not taking corporate PAC money, who are not taking fossil fuel money, and that we make sure that Congress is full of those people rather than being a small minority. And I think that is absolutely key to making sure that we start building a system that is moving away from corporate money in politics. And I think that's absolutely essential moving forward. In terms of other things, we need to make sure that we have greater transparency in where money is coming from and who is funding whom and how. And I think that enforcement of those rules is critical. right? And so, for example, the FEC, which is supposed to be helping us with this, doesn't even have a quorum at the moment because of the appointments that have been long delayed. And I think part of that, of course, has to do with who we have as the president and the administration that is frankly corrupt and that has held up appointments that are crucial to democracy, including ones like for the FEC. And I think being able to enforce those rules is obviously going to be a huge part of getting the influence of corporate money out of politics. So I think in general, making sure that as the people, we elect more folks who are not taking corporate PAC money, which also means supporting with individual donations, candidates like myself and other candidates who are out there trying to do this the right way, making sure that we're only representing people and not corporations, making sure that we demand transparency in corporate donations, that we put limits across the board in terms of lobbying, in terms of access, and that we make sure that access is not necessarily tied to the amount of money that's given to politicians. And I think that those are among the few things that we can do, among the powerful things that we can do to reduce the influence of corporate money. But I think that absolutely what we need to do is, frankly, amend the Constitution. And I think that with enough folks on board, we will be able to do that. Okay, great. So we have a next question. Philip is asking, or maybe it's a different Philip that has another question. It says, what will you do to get the exorbitantly high prices in the US healthcare system down closer to the rest of the developed world? Would you try to link all prices to a negotiated Medicare rate? Yeah, I mean, one of the most powerful things that we have is negotiation with Medicare, right? I mean, we do not flex that muscle at all. We do not use that to negotiate drug prices, and we absolutely must. We have all that power. We need to use it. Part of why we don't use it is pharmaceutical lobbying, among other things. And absolutely, I think that there is no reason why drug prices in the US are triple, quadruple the prices of other places in the world, particularly in Canada and in Europe. And being able to link it to a negotiation with Medicare would be absolutely something that we need to do. And with the single payer system, I think we'll be able to do that, get those drug prices down and be able to increase affordability across the board. So no deductibles, no premiums is helpful with a single payer system. Okay, next question is, so we have a question from Harnur in Glen Rock. Are you on, Harnur?
Yes, I'm on.
Hi, how are you?
Hello?
Hi, you're on.
Hi.
Do you want to ask your question?
Sorry. I think I have, okay. As a student, it's a big concern that due to the uncertainty of the COVID-19 pandemic, education and school curriculum are being altered and students are potentially being held back from in-school resources, especially special needs and disability students. How would you propose providing resources for students who require assistance in adapting to this new form of schooling in order to keep the quality of learning up there?
Great, thank you. That's a really good question. It goes to the heart of education equity, which we've talked about a little bit in the past. And I can't imagine being a student right now with all the things that are going on. So I appreciate you highlighting this, particularly for the population with special needs and disability. It's one of the things that we talked about a little bit last time. It is a huge concern, right? Because while technology is here, there are terrible inequities in education curriculum. There are inequities in terms of access to Wi-Fi and access to computers, in having adequate assistive devices for folks who can't use computers like some of the differently abled are able to. And I think that what's necessary, and I know that COVID relief packages, especially recently, have had funding for educational resources to be able to help. I think what is necessary is that we make sure that we center around the disabled community, that we center around folks with special needs, so that we are providing those resources that are necessary, right? And that we are making sure that we are also providing resources, not just for folks who have special needs, who are disabled, but also identifying them accurately, making sure that the resources that are there are appropriate for what is needed, and that we are providing also resources to school districts that are that historically have are in vulnerable communities, or are lower income school districts, as well as folks that are as well as supporting teachers in being able to teach in appropriate manners. So we had an education town hall where we had somebody who was a school psychologist who worked in a with a special needs population, and spoke about video conferencing not necessarily being adequate for the population that was hearing impaired because of glitches in Zoom, and folks not being able to hear, or folks not being able to lip read or communicate in real time. And similar to that, assistive devices that are necessary that are not necessarily provided at the same rate or the same level as in other places. So absolutely being able to center around that, I think is important. And I think that the quality of learning is a really important issue. It's very difficult to learn in circumstances like this. I think that while some students are able to focus, others are not. I think that folks have a lot of different things that are happening. If you are a student with a parent or two parents who are essential workers, if you have to work, if you only have one device, for a family, for a large family, all of those things are detriments to learning and to a quality education. So all of those social and emotional supports are necessary. And I think that we need to do more and make sure that we have those resources, that make sure that we're supporting our teachers, our boards of education, our support staff, so that they're able to best help the students as well. Okay, we have another question. It's from an anonymous attendee. And the question is, how will you balance trying to move more to the left while still staying elected in a historically Republican district? So thank you for that question. I think that's a really important question that you brought up. So what I want to say is, I think that at the core, NJ5, from the data that we see, is a Democratic district. We are absolutely blue. We have 8,000 more Democrats registered than Republicans at this point. And we had been trending blue since 2014, and we are solidly blue in 2020. We had a registration advantage in 2018 and clearly have one in 2020. So when my opponent won in 2016, he won by 2 points. And when he won in 2018, he won by 14 points. And that swing was not because of the policies necessarily that he had, it's because of the grassroots energy that came into being, that agitated and fought and knocked on more than 30,000 doors for him in terms of the loose coalition of grassroots groups that we had. So there is a huge blue Democratic energy that's here. And I think that the only way we're going to keep the seat blue is when we have a real Democrat who's here, when we have a real Democrat who is fighting for actually the democratic policies that we need for our elected leaders to be fighting for, that we have somebody who is making sure not to undermine the democratic agenda, not to do things like vote for border wall funding or vote to deregulate Dodd-Frank or vote against the Iran war powers resolution. I think what we need is somebody who is going to stand up and represent most of the people in NJ5, who's going to make sure that our policies are based on science, driven by data, centered around the climate crisis. New Jersey is one of the most vulnerable states to climate change. We need someone who not only acknowledges that, but is able to do and implement policies to make us more sustainable and resilient in the future. We need somebody who acknowledges the fact that the healthcare system is completely broken and that we need those big, bold solutions like a single payer healthcare system to make sure that the system works for everybody as much as we possibly can. And the only way we can have that is by having somebody who's not taking corporate PAC money, who's not taking fossil fuel money like I'm not doing, and to make sure that we are representing the people and we are that as elected officials, that we have elected officials that are beholden only to the people and not corporate PACs. So at the core of it, the policies that I'm fighting for, the kinds of things that I'm advocating are absolutely popular policies across the board. Know that folks can disagree on particulars, but the fact that I'm fighting for the people is something that cuts across all party lines, that people respect and they honor and they want in their elected leaders. So for me, it's not even about really moving to the left, it's making sure that I'm representing the people. And the policies that we're fighting for absolutely are what's representing the people. So I think doing that is important. And being able to do that gives folks courage to demand better and to understand that we deserve better. And so I think that that is going to be important in terms of how I serve the district. I mean, what we don't need is somebody who votes with Trump 77% of the time, like my opponent did in 2018. I think that the key to having an elected official who's representing the people is somebody who does what's morally right and what is true and stand up for her beliefs. Across the board. And I think folks respect that, understand that, and that's exactly what they want in elected officials. Okay, we have more questions. So the next question is from another anonymous attendee. It's how would you address the growing income inequality in America, along with the lack of health insurance and a social safety net, so apparent during this crisis from a policy perspective? So the question is, how would you address the growing income inequality in America, along with the lack of health insurance and a social safety net, so apparent during this crisis from a policy perspective? Thank you for that question. We've talked a lot about how the COVID-19 crisis has really unveiled the fact that the policies that we're fighting for, including a single payer healthcare system, including making sure that we are centering and having collective and decisive action on climate crisis is absolutely imperative now more than ever. Right, this is a pandemic, this is a public health crisis. I spoke at the beginning about how we are going to need more access to healthcare. We're going to need universal healthcare. And ideally, and what I'm fighting for is a single payer healthcare system where everybody is taken care of, right? We're absolutely going to need this because of the public health crisis that we're in, and that because of the climate crisis that is upon us already. This pandemic, while it's a shock to the system, it's not going to be the only public health crisis that we have. We're going to have more and more of them as the crisis looms, as the climate crisis gets worse. So we need folks in Congress who are going to be able to implement policies that are based on science, based on data, that help us become more sustainable and more resilient in the future. And that includes a stronger social safety net. So that includes universal paid sick leave, right? We need to make sure that people are able to take care of themselves for themselves, but also for the good of society. We need to make sure that they don't come to work and infect other people. We need to make sure that they can take care of themselves, that they can take care of their family members. We need to make sure that they are economically secure, that they're not worried about going into a hospital or a doctor's office because they're worried about how to pay for it. We need to make sure that our undocumented folks are also being taken care of in terms of the stimulus checks, in terms of making sure that they have an income as well. So all of those things are absolutely going to be helpful in terms of narrowing the income inequality gap, right? At this point, we have billionaires that have become even richer during this pandemic, while we have folks who have lost jobs, lost hours, are in the imminent danger of losing their homes, are worried about, have lost health insurance, and are worried about how they're going to pay for their medications or how they're going to care for their health. And we have a choice right now as a society. We have a choice of whether or not we continue the path that we're on and make this income inequality even worse, and make our most vulnerable communities hurt even more. Or we can come together and fight all together and make sure that we strengthen our social safety net, because doing that strengthens all of our society. So I think coming out of this pandemic crisis, it's going to be even more imperative to fight for Medicare for all, to fight for universal paid sick leave, to make sure that we are taking care of as many people as possible, and to make sure that this is an opportunity for us to jumpstart our economy by implementing the Green New Deal, by making sure that we have clean energy jobs, that we have green jobs, green infrastructure, as we go back to figuring out how we're going to reopen America. We have another question. This one is from Richie. Richie, are you on?
Yes, I'm on.
Hi, thank you so much for being on. Would love to hear your question.
Yeah, absolutely. So this question is especially personal for myself, being a student at Montclair State University. So without further ado, with COVID-19, student income has diminished, yet expenses are continuing to increase. After being left out of the stimulus bill, countless college students are still struggling. What could we do to stop students from crumbling under debt before they even reach the job market?
Thank you for that question. Student loan debt in particular is so crushing. And unfortunately, the fact that we've had so much of it over the years, and particularly with no end in sight, is one of the things that, as you know, has made college students struggle, but also folks who are out of college struggling. I think that we absolutely need to move towards student loan forgiveness. It is imperative that we do that for the economy, for folks who are coming out of college right now. And with the job market being the way it is difficult to fathom what could happen moving forward. And we absolutely cannot have students like yourself, people who are coming out of college right now, not even being able to get a job, be crushed by the student loans that they have. So at the least, the moratorium on student debt payment is necessary, but that's really the least of it. We absolutely need to move towards student loan forgiveness, and which is what I'll be fighting for in Congress. Okay, so we have a question from Gabriella. Hi, Gabriella, are you on?
Yes, I should be on.
Great.
Hi. So I was inspired to ask this question today because I was actually phone banking for you, and I was talking to a voter who had just recently been placed on unemployment and was struggling to actually receive their unemployment. So with that said, over 2.5 million people have filed for unemployment just this week alone, and over 40 million people are currently jobless. How do you plan to advocate for those unemployed within NJ5, and what measures should the country be focused on in order to revive the economy? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Gabriella, thank you so much for phone banking for us. It is so important, and I really appreciate you volunteering. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for bringing that question up, right? What you shared about folks who are filing for unemployment are still struggling to get their benefits is a very real thing. You know, I've been hearing that a lot. Been trying our best to connect folks with resources to make sure that they're getting unemployment as soon as possible and as fast as possible. And so that is definitely one big concern that I'm aware that people have. Your question is about the unemployment that we have and how we can advocate for those who are unemployed, and really what measures we can have as a country to revive the economy. I think those are really good questions. I mean, looking at the unemployment number is staggering on a weekly basis, which also means that there's so many more people who are struggling a whole lot more than they were just weeks ago. And the fact that these numbers keep going up is really disheartening. So first and foremost, those relief packages, the money that the federal government has allocated needs to get to the states as soon as possible. And what we need to do is make sure, particularly in Jersey, that we ramp up, that we put the pressure on our state government to ramp up everything that they possibly can to make sure that unemployment checks are getting to people as soon as possible, as fast as possible. I have personal experience with folks who have called time and again, multiple times, trying to get through. And the sad reality is it's an antiquated system. And it is a system that takes a lot of training to get up on the other side, and that we were just not prepared. And we just need to be as prepared as possible, as fast as possible. And we need to keep agitating to make sure that happens. And as an elected official, I've been trying to do that on a local basis and would continue to fight for that in Congress, as many resources as we possibly can get to make sure that people have that. And part of that would be that $2,000 a month cash assistance would be absolutely helpful, where that we don't just have to rely on unemployment. In terms of what measures should the country be focused on in order to revive the economy, the Green New Deal. What we need to do, a federal jobs guarantee. We need to make sure that we have the opportunity right now to make that shift that we've been needing to make for a very long time. And we should take that. We should make sure that we are advocating and implementing jobs that are clean jobs, that are green jobs, that are going to be helping our economy, that are also going to be helping us move to a more sustainable future. We need to get to a point where we are reducing our emissions to zero in a few short years. And the only way you can do that is with a coordinated program from the federal government. And this is the time that we should be doing this. And I think that absolutely, as we know, many jobs are not coming back, unfortunately. So this is the time with which we can have a federal jobs guarantee, with which we can actually implement the Green New Deal and help both our economy and help us become more sustainable in the future. Okay, so we have, next question is from Christine, who is watching on Facebook. Christine, thank you so much for watching on Facebook. And she is asking, remote learning for public school students is lacking. It's a stressful situation for parents and teachers, but enough time has passed for a more comprehensive plan. Please let us know your thoughts. So thank you for that question. Absolutely, remote learning, distance learning, crisis learning, all of those things are lacking for sure. And it is absolutely a stressful situation. I'm working from home. My kids are home. They are a little bit on the older side. They're 14 and 12. And so they are remote learning every day. And as self-sufficient as they can be, as independent as they can be. It is a very stressful situation, both for them as students, for teachers who are trying to put this together, and for parents who are trying to help while also probably working at the same time or doing a myriad of other things and being stressed about the situation. So the question is, or the comment was, but enough time has passed for a more comprehensive plan. So I think that the teachers, to be honest, are doing the best they can at this point. So it's been what seems like 100 years since we've had stay-at-home orders, but really the reality is it's been a little bit more than 2 months. And I think that folks, especially now, are doing the best they can to try and make sure they're addressing the students' needs. So we see, and we've talked about the inequities in education in terms of making sure that students have access to technology, that teachers understand and have access to technology and are able to teach. I think this is not an easy situation for everybody, or really for anybody at all at this point. I think that we have to allow ourselves grace, and we have to allow ourselves a little bit more patience to make sure that we are able to deal with this to the best of our abilities. I think that folks have settled down a little bit more in terms of what they're doing. And while we know that we are not going back physically to school, at least not until after June, I think this is an opportunity for teachers, for administrators to take the time to really think about what has worked, what hasn't worked, where those resources need to be placed, and how they can train teachers and support staff better for the future, to be able to figure out what we can do as we move forward, whether or not we go back to school physically next year or go back to school on a different basis, moving forward. What is clear, though, is that we need to make sure that we have enough communications for those folks who are doing really well with remote learning, to be able to communicate what the best practices are, and really to be able to highlight folks who are having issues, students who are still struggling, teachers who are still struggling, because technology is not necessarily easy, and some of the best teachers are having the most trouble with technology, and it's an understandable issue given all the things that are going on. So I would say that communication about best practices is key. Being able to coordinate that across school districts, across the state, federally, I think is key. And making sure that we concentrate on the best efforts and the fact that we're doing the best we can for all the students, and centering around those of us who are more vulnerable and who have more special needs is going to be really important moving forward. So. Okay, we have next question. Lisa asks, Bonnie Watson-Coleman has initiated legislation addressing, hi Lisa, you're on. Are you on? Oh, I guess she's not. Okay, so Lisa's question is, Bonnie Watson-Coleman has initiated legislation addressing rural areas that do not have internet high-speed connectivity. Can you comment on that? CD5 has rural areas that need to address their tech challenges as well. Absolutely. 100%, we need to make sure that we have internet broadband connectivity. I have supported net neutrality from day one. I think that what we need to do is make sure that we have Wi-Fi for all, which is something that one of our panelists had talked about in the education panel. And I think that in particular with the rural areas in NG5, this is absolutely key. My opponent does not believe in net neutrality, thinks that we should have businesses come up with a plan and self-regulate. I think that's absolutely the opposite. At this point, we know, particularly in the pandemic crisis, that internet is a right. It is not a luxury. It is not a privilege. At this point, it is absolutely necessary to be able to survive, to be able to educate ourselves, to be able to even get groceries, and to be able to see our doctors with telehealth coming up. So for all of those reasons, the internet, particularly in this day and age, has become a necessity, has become a right. And the federal government in particular needs to do all it can to make sure that we have high-speed access in all areas to the internet. And the most effective way of doing that is to advocate for net neutrality and to ensure that we have all different areas that have access to this as much as possible. And so that is a huge difference between my opponent and me. So thank you for that question. Great. I think we have one last question coming up. Let's see. It is from Jeff. I think it's the next question that's here. And the question is, Jeff, are you on?
I am.
Oh, great. Please ask your question.
I live next to a Congresswoman Tlaib's district, which suffers sky-high asthma rates due to the fossil fuel processing plants there. What does your support for the Green New Deal look like for uplifting people in New Jersey 5, especially communities of color?
Great. Well, thank you for that question. I really appreciate it. And it's really important to talk about the climate crisis and centering around communities of color and vulnerable communities. So I appreciate the question very much. Unfortunately, in Bergen County, in New Jersey District 5, air pollution or air quality gets an F, has gotten an F in terms of where we are with air pollution. And so what we have seen with the pandemic crisis is a 30% decrease in air pollution in Bergen County alone, which tells you a lot about where we are and where we need to be. So my vision for clean energy, my vision for green infrastructure and centering around and being able to talk about the climate crisis and to be able to collectively and decisively do something about it centers absolutely around communities of color and low-income communities, right? Because those are the ones who unfortunately have borne the brunt of the pollution problem for decades and centuries. This point, one particular point that I want to bring up is my personal opposition, to the NJ Transit power plant in Kearney, New Jersey, which is a little bit outside of my district, but really would disproportionately affect communities of color that are within a 2 to 3 mile radius around there. And I've been on record on public actually very recently talking about at a recent NJ Transit board meeting, talking about the opposition to it and how we really should be looking for alternatives to make sure that our infrastructure, our mass transit is more resilient, but is more resilient using clean energy, that there does not need to be a new gas power plant there. And in fact, that there are alternatives that are quite a bit better that we can invest in. So resiliency should go hand in hand with sustainability, should go hand in hand with centering around making sure that we are uplifting communities of color and not making them bear the brunt of the burden as they have for so long. I've been on the record opposing the Meadowlands power plant, which we were successful, the coalition was successful in ensuring did not happen. Again, ensuring that we were ensuring that there were no that there was not an increase in fossil fuel plants, particularly NJ. And we need to have a moratorium on fossil fuel plants. We need to have a moratorium on fracking, particularly because as these new initiatives go into effect, they absolutely affect communities of color and low-income communities the most. So that would be, that is one of the most important things that I think that we need to talk about and that we need to implement moving forward. So thank you for that. All right, so I think those are all the questions that we are able to answer at this point in this town hall. I really appreciate everyone coming on board and asking the questions. I know we have a bunch more, and if we have them, and if we have a lot more questions, please keep them coming. I will answer them, and we will be sharing those answers on all the different media that you've asked these questions on. Absolutely. Because I think this is really important. We'll be doing another town hall again soon, and we will continue with these questions. And so I appreciate all of you coming on board, asking these questions, having this discussion. I think this is imperative that we do this, and I think that having these kinds of having this kind of communication is absolutely crucial. As we wrap up for today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the kinds of things that I've been thinking about, particularly this week. We started off on Memorial Day thinking about the sacrifices that folks have made for this country, thinking about the kinds of ways that brave soldiers and sailors have not come home. And the fact that I'm lucky as a sister of a veteran to have somebody who was deployed, who came home safe. And then looking at the incidences that happen every single day to Black Americans. And the fact that they are dying disproportionately every day because of the systemic racism that happens, that is inherent in all of our institutions. That makes equity impossible at this point. And I've been thinking a lot about what we all owe to ourselves and our communities. And I think at the core of it, we all need leaders who are true allies, who are going to make sure that they vocally and loudly support movements like Black Lives Matter, and that they do everything they can to dismantle these systems of racism that occur at all different levels, whether it's at a level like council, where I am, whether it is in a board of education or in police or on a federal level. And I think that we absolutely need to make sure that we have folks who are understand their complicity in white supremacy, in holding up systems of racism that harm Black people every day, and that we are all able to do anti-racist work every day, and to be able to hold ourselves and our communities accountable to our attitudes, and to make sure that we're taking actions every single day to do the hard work that's necessary, because people are dying every single day. So thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all of your questions and comments, and I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation again next week and in every other way. So thank you.